Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video episode on Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian, and today we have another really cool pistol to show you. We have this courtesy of a gentleman named Kaiser Wilhelm, who very generously agreed to let us take a look at it. This is a German Jaeger pistol. It was made in 1916, I believe, and it's got some really interesting manufacturing techniques going on with it. So, a little bit of background. Originally, Franz Jaeger was a German. He opened up a factory making firearms in 1901 in Suhl, which is a region right in the center of Germany that is really well known for metalworks and weapons fabrication all the way back to the Renaissance and probably earlier. Jaeger was well known for very high quality sporting arms, rifles and shotguns primarily. But at the beginning of World War I, a royal decree came down that there was to be no more sporting arms manufacture, that all materials and production for firearms was to go to military weapons. It makes sense. Germany had gotten itself into a big war. So rather than just shut down his shop, Jaeger came up with a design for a pistol that could be used for German officers. Now, this was never actually adopted by the German army, but it was available for private purchase to officers, and it's thought that about 3,000 of these guns did actually see military service, although they were never formally issued. So this is, it was only made in .32 caliber, 32 ACP. It's a straight blowback pistol, and fairly typical from the outside. We have a detachable magazine, holds 7 rounds. The interesting part of this pistol comes when you go to take it apart. So, let's just take a quick look at the outside here. We have 2 plungers right here. These are actually depressed using this bit on the magazine. I can push that in. And the gun does not have a frame as such. It's made up of 4 independent parts. We have 2 side plates, a back strap, and a front strap. So the way we're going to disassemble this is, let's start with the front strap. We're going to push in this plunger, and the whole front strap is going to pivot out. Like that. This is the trigger bar, which isn't held in by anything in particular, so we'll pull that out. So the front strap comes out like this. Before we go any farther, let's go ahead and take the grip panels off. There we go, there's that one. And the other one. Now, the one other thing we should tell you about this pistol is that the trigger return spring is broken. Unfortunately, when Mr. Wilhelm went to shoot this, the spring that holds tension on the trigger bar snapped after, I believe, 2 shots. So it's been more or less, there's a functional repair in there, but the broken piece does come out when we disassemble the pistol, which it wouldn't normally. So anyway, so we've got the front strap here, we've got the back strap. Those are both held in place by screws. So if I go ahead and take this guy out, we can then remove the front strap of the pistol. So we can take the back strap out the same way. We're going to push in the plunger here, pivot it out. We do have to lift slightly up on the slide so that this unit, which has the trigger in it, can clear the striker assembly inside. Go. Now the back pivots out on its screw right here. I'm going to leave that intact for just a moment. Now the slide, we can pull back, lift up, and pull off the front of the gun. Alright. How's that for a haphazard looking, half-assembled pistol? Alright, we continue the disassembly. We have our slide here, It is the outside shell of the slide and the breech block, which are separate parts. The breech block falls right out, and it's held in place just by the pin and semicircular cut in the breech block. So when this is in place, that pin prevents it from going forward or backward, and the two side plates of the receiver back here press up on these two surfaces of the breech block. The interaction between those three parts, the two side plates and the shell of the slide, is what holds the breech block in place. So we'll come back to that in a moment. For now, let's go ahead and finish disassembly here. Take out the screw that is holding the back strap in place. Now we have one more screw in the center. Take that one out. And our side plate comes off. The center screw does have a little tubular support. This way you cannot over tighten the center of the gun and jam things up. We have a recoil spring, our barrel assembly, the two lugs, trunnions really on either side, fit it into the side plates. And then this lug on top runs in a channel in the slide. And there are two side plates. And see them edge on here. The right plate here is pretty standard. It does have the spring that holds the trigger bar in place. This trigger bar sits right here. And our spring, like I said, this is broken. This is not how it originally quite would have looked, but this is how it originally would have functioned. So we have our spring in there, and that holds pressure on the trigger bar here. Then on the opposite side, on the the left-hand side plate, we do also have an ejector. This is a separate piece of metal. We'll take a close-up look at it. There is a round pin right in the middle. Pointed out. Right there is the center, and that's what holds it in place. So it's put on and then pin pressed down to make it a permanent attachment to the side plate. So the literature on this gun, what it's usually spoken about is that this is the first stamped construction automatic pistol. And it sort of is. The two side plates were in fact stamped out of sheets of steel, which is, it was really ahead of its time back in World War I, but in coming decades, stamping would become a very popular, very effective way of manufacturing firearm parts. Back with this, the real, see, there's still a whole bunch of components in the Jaeger that have to be machined. The barrel assembly has to be machined, the back strap, the front strap, the breech block assembly, the slide, which we'll get to in a moment. There's a ton of machining still in this. What you actually save by doing these two side plates out of sheet metal is you don't have to have a single frame that is forged and then broached. The most complicated bit of doing a pistol receiver like that is the hole for the magazine, because that, you can't cut that with a mill. You have to go in with a broaching tool to cut it out, and that's a fairly expensive process. And it's a process that the Jaeger factory probably didn't really have the tools to do based on their work with rifles and sporting rifles and shotguns. So it was really very clever on the part of Franz Jaeger to come up with this design that uses 4 separate components bolted together to recreate a pistol frame. What it doesn't do is make the gun substantially cheaper to make than any other pistol on the market. It just means that it can be done for a reasonable cost by a company that's not really set up to do pistols. So there are a lot of really interesting features here. Let's take a look at the Now the slide is a bit of a conundrum. If you read the literature, it always says that this slide was also a stamping, that it started as kind of a paddle-shaped piece of metal with these two side plates folded out, and then they were pressed down vertically. And it's true that this back piece, if you zoom in, you can see there's a line on either side. This back plate is a separate component, and it's held in place with a screw. And the front, the bearing that the barrel runs in, is also a separate component. However, there are a couple places where there's obviously been machining done on this. This groove, which matches up to the plug on the barrel. This was obviously machined out. And if this had been stamped, this corner would have to be cut out. Because if you take this plane and raise it up, you don't get that geometry. So we're pretty sure that these slides were actually machined from a block of steel. If you leave the front and the back off, that's a very easy operation because you can run a cutter right down the middle, just cut the whole thing out. And we don't have any absolute proof, but we're pretty sure that this slide was not, in fact, stamped. Now that doesn't detract from the coolness of this pistol, at least not in my mind. It has a very simple firing mechanism. We have the breech block here, and it has a striker with a spring inside. And what happens is this bar, let's see what's the best way to describe this. This piece right here is the sear. So when you pull the trigger, this sear comes down. So when it's in the gun, it catches the striker and pulls it back. And when you pull the trigger, this retracts down, it loses grip of the striker and lets the firing pin snap forward. I'm going to assemble this briefly with the back strap and the front. Alright, so I've reassembled the front and back strap and one of the side plates so that we can demonstrate exactly how this trigger mechanism works. We have the trigger here, which pushes on the trigger bar back there. The spring holds tension on the trigger bar. Now if we look at the back, when I pull the trigger, this piece is pulled down, and this little round nub on top of the trigger bar acts as our disconnector. So normally the slide is closed up here, and when we pull the trigger, it fires. Now we can't hear it snap, obviously, because the firing pin's not there. Then the slide comes back, and the slide hits this round nub, which drops down, no longer acts on the trigger, and that acts to reset the trigger, so that you can't just hold the trigger down and have it fire as a machine gun. So once again, the trigger spring down there pushes this up. When I pull the trigger, it drops the sear, and when the slide goes back, it pushes on the disconnector and releases and resets the sear so that it will catch the striker when the bolt comes forward. Hopefully that made sense. Now again, to get back to the stamping a little bit, typically if you're doing a stamping, the goal is to stamp a part and not have to do as little as possible to it after it's been stamped. And the Jaeger doesn't quite do that. Once this side plate is cut out, for example, we do have the extractor that has to be mounted, and then there's some machining that has to be done to it as well. You can see the rear half here is raised relative to the front half, and there is a semicircular concave cutout here on the side that gives some room for the recoil spring. So with things like the extractor and this, the concave cutout and this machining, if the goal here were to seriously reduce production time by using stampings, it didn't really work out. However, if the goal was to avoid needing a single solid machined frame, they did a great job, and this does that perfectly. The extra machining isn't that big of a deal. These are all fairly simple operations, and it allows them to build this gun without needing a big forged and then broach cut frame. So as I'd said, about 3,000 of these guns, it's thought, actually saw military service with the German Army. There are, I believe right now, 10 known to exist in the US that have military acceptance proofs on them. There are obviously more than that that are actually in collectors' hands. Known serial numbers right now go up to 6,000 or 7,000. The literature says that between 12 and 15,000 were actually manufactured. So not a whole lot of these survived. They're a really interesting side note in pistol development, because we wouldn't see another gun built like this. Well, we haven't seen another gun built quite like this ever since. But a lot of these manufacturing techniques, primarily the stamping, wouldn't make a comeback for quite a long time after World War I. We'd really like to thank Brian Wilhelm for letting us take a look at this and take it apart and fondle it and show you how it all works. It's a really cool pistol. I do want to point out, Mr. Wilhelm, who owns this gun, has taken a whole crapload of really good pictures of it and put them on the gun boards for him, along with some really good description of all the really intricate details, more than we could get into in a video like this. So we'll have a link to that thread with all of his pictures below, and if you're interested in more detail in the Jaeger, definitely check that out. You'll enjoy it.
I thought you put the left side plate on first.
No, I have to do the bottom one because otherwise the broken trigger spring falls out every time. Yeah, I did try it that way, get you to help, and then you laughed, and I had to do it myself while you were gone.